just be curious. And sometimes that requires us to ask questions, work with different people, try new things, evaluate where we're at, and being honest with sometimes the excuses that get in the way. You know, you had this corny slide. It wasn't corny, but it was kind of corny. It said,
It's corny.
Your why has to be bigger than your butt. And it's true. You have to have a reason because there's always an excuse. You know, it is easier in the case of the guy you're talking about or someone struggling with sleep. It is easier to take a pill.
But when you start diving into the why, the purpose, the reason, then you start putting that in place. And now they're starting to think about it. And then are they willing to take? And again, it doesn't have to be so painful, but you have to get a little uncomfortable to see change occur.
So as we get back in the Rest Eat Move podcast, we're back in full force. We got the big fella, Chris Johnson, and myself, Matt Johnson. I wanted today to talk about something that I'm personally doing, trying to expand my training, trying to do things that I'm uncomfortable doing, which ultimately lead to the things that I should be doing. So before we dive into maybe some strategies that everyone can kind of take away, here's what I'm doing. My hip flexors are very tight, which kind of means that they're weak. And I tend to try to stretch them out, but I don't really strengthen them. So I'm doing a couple new classes each week on top of my normal routine. So I'm going to a Pilates Pure Barre style class, and then I'm doing yoga once a week. And it hit me today when I was in yoga class that I do these holds almost every day, but very rarely do I hold them as long as I held them today. And, you know, that's what I want to talk about with you, you know, in your experience of training. And we all do things that we're comfortable doing, and we all do things that we like to do, but where should we kind of think about things that we're uncomfortable doing and things we don't like to do?
For me personally, you want to get good at what you're doing, and then you realize that you don't know what you don't know. So a big thing when I train myself is you get used to the same movements over and over and over, and sometimes you have to shake it up and not really get super crazy about it. But for example, I'm seeing Jill Marlin. She was on our podcast, and I've been doing therapy with her once a week. And one of the things I've been working on is my hamstring. And one of the things she's talked to me about, the coordination of my spine isn't as good as it should be. So my firing and just small little changes. So now we've started working on some training. I've done this with Walt too, in my own training with Walt Reynolds, is that I'm expanding my capacity per se. And so I'm adding more speed to my movements. So I've done lunges, I've done step ups, I've done squats, and doing all this kind of stuff that you think about for your lower body. But I'm also working on coordination movements and really adding more speed. So now I'm kind of getting out of my comfort zone. And so I'm adding speed components where I'm actually doing like almost a jumping lunge and holding it. And I jump back to the other side and hold it. So if I did this on my own, I'm like, this isn't fun. It's very challenging. So I think when I'm playing, and you feel the same way, when I'm playing paddleball, I want to continue to be able to do the stuff I want to do and getting outside my comfort zone. So when I'm playing, obviously I'm outside that parameter.
But you're playing. It's fun.
Yeah,
you're
playing,
reaching for a ball.
But I'm also going to be
point.
in situations where I'm not training that way. And so sometimes we have to be a little uncomfortable or maybe look at it a little differently of how can we expand that capacity.
And I think sports specificity is always important. Sometimes I think we go too extreme. Like these kids are 12 years old doing sports specificity for every single movement, but yet they don't have the foundations. And then for someone at 65, you probably get away from sports specificity training. But you still train and you still have great flexibility and strength and foundations. And so, it's part of the conversation. One of my observations, and there's a lot of information that we've talked about over the last, couple weeks and months of podcasts, but you do have to get uncomfortable to have some adaptation. And so if my goal is to have more flexibility in my hips, which it is for many things, for general life, for golf, for just feeling better running or just sitting, um, I'm going to have to push it to a point where it's a little uncomfortable. And the way that I train, and I think the way that you train, is I know what I'm doing. I've done what I'm doing for a long time. I get used to what I'm doing. But sometimes I don't know a different variation or a different way to think about it or a different way to fire my nervous system for those movements. And I was doing a Pure Barre class with it's 100% women.
Mm-hmm.
And my legs are shaking after 30 minutes. And these women who do it a lot and probably have a little more flexibility in their hips and maybe not as much muscle mass or body weight to hold up on their toes, my feet are cramping.
Mm-hmm.
And, those are things that it's not fun. It's not always comfortable, but I left feeling really good. I left feeling, my right hip feels a little more released.
Mm-hmm.
And today doing yoga, I'm holding a downward dog. I do downward dog every day, but I don't hold it for 30 seconds. I hold it for like 4
Well, and
or
I think
5.
what you're saying, it's all little adjustments. And I think that's what we all look at. I mean, we talk a lot about Entire Living Small Steps to Healthy Living. We've been talking a lot about behavior change, building habits, building the foundation. But once you start doing that, people ask me all the time. In fact, I just had a guy in here that I was training, and when we were talking a bit about weight loss, and if to get you to where you want to be, you don't have to starve yourself. You don't have to get crazy with it, but you have to turn the dial up a little bit more to see some changes. And when I've done bodybuilding over the course of time, I always looked at like I'm eating pretty clean, but to get to that level, I have to definitely get uncomfortable. I definitely want to eat more. Now, am I starving? Is my energy level good? All that stuff's fine, but I'm still would like to eat more or eat more often, or the list goes on. So I think that's where we all have to how can we just challenge? I don't have to step off the cliff, but I might have to get closer to the edge. And I think sometimes we don't. We want to go back to what's it's the comfortable shoe. It's just we go back to what's comfortable.
Yeah, I was talking to one of the ladies during the class or after the class, and she said, "Well, what do you do?" And I was like, "I teach people how to exercise and move." And I almost felt like there's no way she could even think that I do this for a living, because this was very difficult for me. And it's an example of we have to push ourselves sometimes to think and just explore. What else could we be adding if you're curious? If you're comfortable where you're at and you're like, I don't like where my hips are at, that's so there's
But
enough
to get you to change, you have to get a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, you got to get uncomfortable. And so like my legs are a little bit wobbly, they're fatiguing, they're the type of movements, the type of training is completely different in some aspects. Isometric holding. Very rarely do I do that in my routine. Do you do much isometric holding?
Well, again, big part of what we try to teach, and again, sometimes we just get caught in a routine, but I'm doing the same speed or the same rate consistently. And so like today it hit me, I'm doing a group this morning. We had probably 35, and the session was all about movement. And so I was showing them how to do all these movements without any added resistance.
We changed the
But
speed.
I changed the speed.
Right.
And a couple people had said,
Hurry
I
up.
do this all the time, but this is killing me. Mm-hmm. We just changed the speed. We really were doing holds and pauses, and then we changed the speed around. So I think we all get comfortable of what we do, but sometimes we have to watch a video, go to a class, hire a trainer, whatever it might be, listen to a podcast.
That's a good point. Where do you think everyone, even the people like me and you that do it for a living, how valuable are instructors or teachers or trainers? Don't you believe that everyone should have a little bit of coaching?
Oh, everybody should have coaching. And so it was interesting one day, I was working out with Walt, quite a few months back. And I remember talking to somebody about this. I was doing some speaking event or whatever, and somebody says, "You have a trainer? Why do you have a trainer?" And I'm like, I have a trainer because I want to continue to try to get better. or they can look at things differently. And so if I'll use Jill as an example doing therapy, I've learned so much from her about, the body and the coordination. She's talking to me about S1 and L5 and the coordination of your spine. And so she did a couple different things and opened up my back and stuff that we're teaching right now, decompression stuff for the spine, hip circles, whatever. And when I started doing that, my patella reacted differently and my knee. And so she says, when you start moving these, especially when you start moving faster, you're just a little bit slow on your hamstrings firing. And no wonder, hello. She goes, you have great flexibility, especially for your age. That's not the problem. The problem is that the coordination is not there. And so this is what we need to do to coordinate it. Hence, we added speed.
So that coach
like
is critical. That teacher is critical.
The coach is critical. And again, are you opening up the mind to being curious to learn new things?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be transparent and honest. It's very humbling. So the Pure Barre class. So I was down in Jacksonville, Florida, and I went to the Players Championship. I walked it, went to it, then played golf the next day, and I had like 6 hours to kill before the flight, and I was by myself. So I thought, I want to go. I work out. I could go for a run, but I want to go be taken through an exercise routine. So I'm looking at yoga, and so I hopped on and I found a Pure Barre class, and I took a class I knew nothing about, and it was a reformer class, so it's a little Pilates based. And it felt challenging, but I felt good, and it was just an experience that I think more and more people should be exposed to. Is I think we sometimes take for granted what we know is what we know, but there's more to learn. And I think we all need a coach. I play golf. I told you I went down for the golf. All of those players are elite, and 99% of them have a coach. The coach isn't YouTube. The coach isn't social media. The coach is physically there looking at the way that person's moving and thinking about, how you could move in a little better way. And that's valuable.
And I remember when Tiger Woods was going through, whether it's Hank Haney or Butch Harmon or whatever, and he's working on new stuff. How can a guy that wins everything on the planet in the year 2000 want to change his swing?
Because he knows there's 5% better somewhere.
And so was he uncomfortable? So think about that level. The best player in the history of golf and wins everything in sight, and now he's trying to
rebuild it. Break it down and
his swing. Rebuild it. Rebuild what? But that gets you to, that's a different mindset. Like, we went skiing in Colorado a month or so ago, and I started thinking about that. Some of my training that I've done with Jill and Walt has really made me ski better. And I'm thinking, well, at 65, am I really going to get better skiing? I kind of think I did. So it really hit me like, no matter where you are, am I going to jump as high, run as fast? The answer is probably no. But it's kind of fun to take a Pure Barre class or go to this and learn more about it. And again, when we think we know it all, that's kind of where we're in trouble. So the curiosity, I think you mentioned this one time in our challenge, take a different class, try something new in 21 days and see what you experience. But I think sometimes we all have to get, when you took the Pure Barre class, you're like, how can these tiny little muscles be killing me, right?
Yeah, I mean, they have a resistance band you put around your ankle, and I was like, can I do this without the resistance band? Because it's plenty challenging, and yet the woman next to me is looking like she's out, drying her nails and daydreaming. This is easy to her. So everybody's in a different spot, just the same way that sometimes I go into the gym, I push 70, 80-pound dumbbells, kind of easy. But in that moment, I do know how to slow the pace. I can change the variations of it. But sometimes we got to kind of get out in some different spaces. So my weakness, I avoid.
Everybody does.
Everybody does. And so these classes they're helping me spend more time on my weakness. Just like if I were to hire a instructor of anything, they're going to look and say, I see you got these weaknesses. Let's work on these. I think sometimes by ourselves, we can only work on our weaknesses so much because we may not see them.
And we want to be, again, we want to get comfortable to a certain level, and you want to enjoy what you're doing. But at some point in time, just ask the question: is this? Do I want to learn more? Do I want to challenge myself? How do I do it? And I don't need to do it by myself. I can hire people.
Well, that's why I did this.
Yeah,
It's too hard for myself.
Yeah, they're experts in this space. Why not? Again, why would I hire another trainer or a therapist? Because I don't know what they're thinking. I want to know what they're thinking. And it's a nice two-way conversation or if you're talking about nutrition or, Dr. Phil, we just had him on the podcast on the mind. I got to tell you, as much as I know about the mind, I know zero compared to him.
Sure.
So that's the always think about.
And different. It's a different
and you're trying to create a support system that can help you grow and get better. I mean, Rashawn talks about this all the time, whether it's affirmations or whatever it is. We all need these things to kind of help us grow and get better, because when we're growing, to me, that's fun. I want to learn more. I mean, last year we went backcountry skiing. Four of us that went, it was probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done. We're climbing in our boots, 10,500 elevation at Jackson Hole, climbing up 35, 40 minutes in a row. Brutal. And we all said the same thing at the end of the day. Do we really want to do this again? No, but it was probably one of the things we'll remember the rest of our lives, because it was so hard, was so challenging. And we learned a ton. I mean, we're with this guy. He's probably one of the top backcountry skiers in the world, 68 years old. So we talked about when he was in an avalanche and this and that. But at the point, I'd rather just get on a lift, ski down, have fun. It's sunny out. But at the end of the day, at some point in time, you want to talk about how hard that was. And it doesn't have to be brutally hurt you, whatever. But sometimes, again, back to being uncomfortable.
Well, it's like, okay, so for me, my hip is bothering me a little bit. And I know it's in my back, my right, oblique, and it gets tight. And I sit and it gets tighter. And I can do some movements. And I can say, okay, I don't like how it feels. Am I functioning? Yeah, I'm functioning 99% of how I would. But I want to be at 100. And so you can say, well, to do that, you're going to have to get uncomfortable for a little period of time. Are you willing to? And I think for a while I was willing to, but I wasn't doing the activity. I wasn't taking the action to get uncomfortable. And all excuses. Like, I love yoga when I'm done, but I get busy and I don't take yoga. So it's the intention, it's the effort, it's the affirmation to yourself that you're doing the good things and feeling good, and finding the uncomfortableness in a way that you enjoy it. So like if you take a yoga class, for example, and you don't like the instructor, go find a different instructor. Or if the studio's not your liking, or the class you took, you didn't like the music, like there's so many different variations to make the enjoyment as high as it can be.
Sure.
But I don't know about you, but when my legs are shaking and my feet are fatiguing, I wouldn't say I like that, but it's kind of feedback that it's something I need to do.
Well, and the other thing too, you're getting an adaptation.
Right.
And so your body is in a space that's not quite used to. You're going to see some type of adaptation. And we don't always have to change everything overnight. We have to work the nervous system, whatever. It's no different in nutrition. People say, well, I'm not losing any weight. Well, the body heals from the inside out. It's like the Chinese bamboo tree. The Chinese bamboo tree doesn't come out of the ground, but we know the root system's growing. And so it's the same thing. You might not fix your hamstring in a second, but you have to kind of go through that, that uncomfortableness to get you to the next level.
What I'm finding is it wasn't the hamstring, and it wasn't that I injured it. It was already weak, right? It was years and years of doing the same movement without expanding the capacity. And so when I went to expand the capacity at 34 to break a 5-minute mile, couldn't keep up. Mm-hmm. So I think we can learn from these things. And so for the listeners, I think the thing that I'm excited about for myself, and I think wanted to share, is be curious. Ask yourself, Do you like where you're at? Are you just going through the motions because you're too used to what you're doing? Have you tried different movements, or are there excuses in the way, like, I did it once, didn't like it? These are things that me and you both say, but yet I've gone to yoga instructors that I thoroughly didn't like. And then there's yoga experiences that you're like, wow, that music was really good. The temperature was perfect. The environment is just completely different. And so the more that I've stepped out of the comfort zone, I found, wow, I didn't even realize that I did like this.
And I think, too, you want to give it some time. So, if you don't like this food and you've just tried it once and you're abandoning ship, or you've tried this movement or whatever it might be, you have to give it some time. And everybody only has so much time and bandwidth, and the list goes on. But at some point in time, step back and say, what am I doing? I remember, hurting my hamstring. And again, it's a chronic injury I've had for a long time. And I kept thinking, there's got to be something here. I'm working on my mobility more than most of these people I'm playing with. I'm working out more than they are. I'm doing all the stuff, but they're not having issues. Well, when she explained to me a little bit more where I was, it just all started to connect. Mm-hmm. Now I understand it. And then I have to mimic my training to mimic what I'm doing. So I'm still doing squats, still doing lunges, doing all these kind of things, but I was doing it at a much slower speed. And so all these little things started opening up. But I think that's the curiosity that we all like, okay, where am I at in my world? What do I need to do? Who do I need to talk to? Sometimes that's who. And again, you're being curious about your hamstring or your back or whatever, your hip flexors. We all have these issues, and everybody has compensations. But you have to get a little uncomfortable, whether it's nutrition or sleep or whatever it might be.
Well, I was listening to the Huberman Lab podcast, and there's some good stuff, and I think there's some stuff you got to take with a grain of salt. But the research out there about cold therapy, whether it's a cold bath or cryotherapy, they're finding that the results for people that are depressed or anxious, there's not a medication on planet Earth that's better. The limitation is people have beliefs and excuses. So if you don't like cold therapy, you're going to say, no, I could never get in a cold bath. But the results are, so if you have this problem, if my hip flexors are bothering me, I can either say I just have bad hip flexors, or I can say, what am I avoiding? Mm-hmm. Or what can I do? And so it was interesting time with where I'm trying to take my fitness, and a lot of people are in pain. A lot of people have some things that they want to improve, but there's excuses in the way. And so excuse for me is, why don't you take yoga more? It makes you feel better. I don't have time, or it's too far from my house, or, all these excuses. We have to accept those, because just like the cold therapy, let's just say you're struggling with anxiety and you're potentially going to take a medication. The question should be, well, have I tried everything that I can do? And if you haven't, then being open to say, okay, let's go try some of these things. Same thing with if you have a hip flexor issue or your hamstring, like, you could probably have a surgery, but have you tried everything before the surgery?
Or I just don't play that sport anymore.
Oh yeah, you quit playing.
Yeah. So now I'm shrinking
your capacity.
One of the things about therapy, the cold therapy, just to touch base on real quickly, I think the real point we want to make is that you don't have to go so brutally hard in cold therapy. It could be an acclimation process. And as you get better at that, like if you're saying, you know what, we have the cold plunge at the Michigan Athletic Club. Many people never, ever put their toe in it because it's too brutal to get into at 48 degrees. But if you can acclimate with that, you maybe get in the hot tub and then you dabble in the cold, or you're at home and you have a hot shower, cold shower, cool shower. These are all ways to acclimate, but it's still not going to be completely comfortable, but it's going to be easier transition. And I think that's where people get sideways too. It's way over here so severe that, yeah, it's uncomfortable. In fact, it's brutally impossible, or I can acclimate slowly into that, whatever therapy might be. including cold.
Yeah, and I think we have to sometimes say, what are we avoiding and why?
Mm-hmm.
So if for example, my hip flexors are bothering me, what am I avoiding? Probably hip flexor type movements. And specifically, I've always thought, I was taught in college, like, if you're tight, you got to increase the flexibility. But one of the things that is really starting to resonate is potentially, though, the lack of flexibility is because it's weak. It's not really working as hard, potentially.
Or it could be
The
an
nervous
imbalance.
system. Yeah, imbalance.
So it's an imbalance. So again, when we do muscle contraction relaxation, it's the coordination. So now we're thinking differently about the muscle. I can stretch it, but it's not necessarily that. It's the coordination of it. So there's a lot of variables to help you move in the direction you want to get better. And that's the fun thing, I think, when we talk about lifestyle, is what's possible. I mean, you think about what's possible in the human body, my health, my gut, can I sleep better? I have so many people that I've come in contact with the last year, they have such a difficult time sleeping. And the question they always want to know is, should I be taking melatonin? Should I be taking a sleep aid? When the reality is, you could talk about hot and cold therapy. What type of movement are you doing? What type of breathing are you doing? Are you consuming magnesium foods? But they're not even aware of that. And number two, which we talk about, are you ready, able, and most importantly, willing?
I think I'm not always willing to get uncomfortable, but the truth is, to get the results most of us want, there has to be some boundary. The box has to be pushed a little bit. And
I had a guy in here the other day, and we were talking about neuropathy and balance and whatever. And I stopped him and I said, hey, are you willing to do X to get here? And he wants to play golf this summer. He says, I am. I got him. So now he's willing, and again, in a really nice way. I'm not going to get him so uncomfortable that he hurts himself, but we got to move you along the continuum a little bit versus, you're moving your body, but you're only moving your body when you come in here. We need to get you to move your body. If you're not willing to move your body, we're not going to get to where you want to be. So those are the conversations you want to always have for yourself and with others is, are they ready? Are they able? But most importantly, are they willing?
Yeah. So as we wrap this up, I think that's the key. Are you willing? And maybe you're not, but are you able? Are you ready? Maybe you're thinking about, maybe this podcast stirred. Yeah. I do have some excuses. We all have excuses. Am I willing? Are you willing to get a little bit uncomfortable for the results you think you're capable of having? And, I think the takeaway for everyone today is just be curious. And sometimes that requires us to ask questions, work with different people, try new things, evaluate where we're at, and being honest with sometimes the excuses that get in the way. You had this corny slide. It wasn't corny, but it was kind of corny. It said,
it's corny.
Your why has to be bigger than your butt. And it's true. You have to have a reason because there's always an excuse. It is easier in the case of the guy you're talking about or someone struggling with sleep. It is easier to take a pill.
But when you start diving into the why, the purpose, the reason, then you start putting that in place. And now they're starting to think about it. And then are they willing to take? And again, it doesn't have to be so painful, but you have to get a little uncomfortable to see change occur.
Yeah, and if you guys want to see me, I'll be uncomfortable a couple times a week at some of these classes. And here's the takeaway for everybody. I'd love to hear if this was struck a chord, if you went out and tried something new, whether that's going for a run, a bike ride, calling a trainer up that you used to train with, going to a class, cooking something new. I think life is so much more rewarding when we are exposed to things we didn't even know existed. And I think as the world speeds up in this digital form, we think we know. But I found, I can watch all the videos in the world, but when I'm in this studio being instructed by an actual instructor that sees my body movements, they kind of push me to a limit that I didn't know was even there. So,
well, and it's the same thing too. You're a higher level golfer. It's the same kind of thing. You can see all these instructional things, but when you actually go on the golf course with a professional, you're going to learn a lot of new. And that to me, that's exciting. We took a pickleball lesson, last year. It was exciting to like what they're thinking. In
some things we didn't even think about,
never thought about, never would.
And we play every week.
Yeah, and we're playing against many times some really good players. But again, it's the same thing in the fitness world. Wherever you are in your world, you might want to hire a professional and say, hey, run me through, take me through. What do you think?
Don't have to do everything.
Don't have to do everything. But that's the thing. Maybe you hire a massage therapist. I mean, when I see Irene or, I see her locally here, but I always learn new things, when I'm working with these guys. So that's the kind of thing you want to think about over time is like, how can I expand my, capacity, and how do I get a little uncomfortable? And many times you're in a space where you're having somebody else guide you and helping you along the way.
All right. So the takeaway, send me an email, info@OnTargetLiving with what you did new this week. Best of luck to everybody, and we'll see you again next time.